Hey guys, tonight we plunge into the icy, murky depths of history, where innocence was tested by a dunk in freezing water. Picture yourself standing on a rickety wooden bridge, the river below swirling like it's got a grudge. The air stinks of damp moss and nervous sweat, and a crowd mutters prayers mixed with bets on whether you'll float or sink. Spoiler, you probably won't survive this, because the logic here is about as sound as a toddler's science project. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. Drop a comment with your city and local time. I'm curious where you're chilling tonight. Now dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. You're not actually on that bridge, but centuries ago, thousands were. The trial by cold water, or judicium aqua frigidae, was a real thing, a twisted way to prove guilt or innocence. It's older than you'd think, stretching back to ancient Mesopotamia around 2000 BC. The Code of Hammurabi, one of the earliest legal systems, mentions ordeals where suspects were tossed into rivers to let the gods decide their fate. If you sank, you were innocent, great, except you're probably dead. If you floated, guilty, and well, good luck with the mob. This wasn't just a quirky Mesopotamian fad, it spread like a bad meme across cultures, from Babylon to early India, where sacred rivers like the Ganges doubled as cosmic lie detectors. Why water? You're wondering that as you imagine yourself shivering on that bridge. Ancient folks believed water was divine, pure, and judgy. It could sniff out sin like a bloodhound. If the river rejected you by spitting you back to the surface, you were clearly up to no good. Sounds like a lose-lose, right? That's because it was. Historians still argue whether these trials were more about fear-mongering or genuine faith in divine intervention. Some say it was crowd control, others think people really trusted the gods to sort it out. Either way, you're not feeling optimistic about your odds. Now, let's talk about the quirky side. In some Babylonian trials, priests would smear clay on your face before the dunk, claiming it sealed your truth. Imagine trying not to sneeze while they cake you in mud, all serious-like. It's almost funny, until you remember the river's waiting. This clay business wasn't just for show, it was meant to bind your soul to the verdict. Sink, and you're pure; float, and you're toast. The irony is nobody checked if the clay made you more boy. Ancients wasn't exactly invited to the party. You're starting to see the pattern. This wasn't about fairness. It was theater's superstition and a dash of desperation. As you stand there, imaginary rope biting your wrists, you notice the crowd's eyes glinting with something unsettling, half fear, half excitement. They're not just here for justice. They're here for a show, and you're the main act. The priest mutters a prayer, the rope tugs, and you're one step closer to the edge. The water's cold, you can feel it without even touching it, and you're wondering how humanity ever thought this was a good idea. But let's not get ahead of ourselves. You're still on the bridge, and there's more to this madness. The trial by cold water wasn't just a one-off. It was a system, polished over centuries, with rules as bizarre as they were brutal. For now, take a breath and like the poor souls who faced this ordeal, you've got time. You're still on that creaky bridge, the river below churning like it's hungry. The crowd's whispers feel like static in your ears, and the rope around your wrists is starting to chafe. Nobody's explained the rules yet, but you're about to get a front-row seat to the bizarre mechanics of the trial by cold water. This isn't just a quick dip, it's a ritual, wrapped in superstition so thick you can practically taste it. Every step is deliberate, from the prayers to the way they tie the knots, and you're wondering if anyone actually believes this will prove anything. Let's break it down. The setup starts with you being dragged to the water's edge, usually a river or lake deemed holy by local priests. They strip you to your underclothes. Is not a priority when gods are watching. Your hands and feet are bound, but not too tight. The water needs a fair shot at judging you. Sometimes they tie a rope around your waist, just in case they feel like fishing you out later. The priest chants, invoking divine judgment, and you catch phrases like "let the pure sink," and let the guilty float. It's like a warped nursery rhyme, and you're not loving the lyrics. Here's the mainstream fact. This ritual was codified in medieval legal texts, like the 9th century Frankish laws under Charlemagne. They called it an ordeal, a divine test for crimes like theft or adultery when evidence was shaky. The logic: water, being pure, would reject sinners. If you floated, your sin was buoying you up guilty. If you sank, you were innocent. Though drowning kind of ruins the victory party. It's a historical head-scratcher, but these rules were followed across Europe for centuries. Now the quirky tidbit: in some regions, they'd weigh you down with a stone, but only a small one, because apparently the gods needed a handicap. Imagine the priest picking out a rock like it's a fine wine, muttering, "This one's just sinful enough." It's absurd. But they believed the stone's weight was calibrated to your soul's purity. Too heavy, and you're cheating the gods. Too light, and you're mocking the trial. Nobody questioned the physics, probably because nobody wanted to be next in line. Historians still argue whether the trial's design was rigged. Some say priests could tweak the ropes or pick murky waters to sway the outcome, ensuring the right verdict for the powerful. Others think the randomness was the point, just as divine will. Either way, you're not feeling like the odds are in your favor as you stand there, toes curling over the bridge's edge. Picture the scene. The water's so cold it stings just looking at it. The crowd's betting on your fate, and some kids eating an apple like this is a county fair. The priest raises his hands, and you're pushed forward. You hit the water, and it's a shock, like 1,000 needles jabbing your skin. You sink fast, the rope's pulling you down, but then a noise bob up. The crowd gasps. You're floating. You want to yell that it's just air trapped in your shirt, but nobody's listening. Science isn't on the guest list. The superstition driving this is wilder than you'd expect. They believe water could read your soul like a cosmic polygraph. Floating meant the water rejected you, spitting you out like bad soup. Sinking meant it embraced you, which sounds sweet until you remember you're out of air. And here's a dark joke for you. They called it a trial, but the only thing on trial was your lung capacity. You're starting to see why this system didn't win any awards for fairness. As you're hauled out shivering and gasping, the crowd's already decided your fate. Floating's bad news, and they're not shy about it. You're guilty, they say, and the priest nods like he knew it all along. But you're wondering about the ones who sank. Did anyone check if they were okay? Spoiler: they usually didn't. The trial was less about justice and more about putting on a show, and you were the unwilling star. You're dripping wet, hauled back onto the bridge like a soggy rag, the crowd's jeers ringing in your ears. The trial's over, but the memory of that icy water clings to you, and you're starting to realize this wasn't just a one-off dunk. Across medieval Europe, the trial by cold water was a full-blown obsession, backed by the most powerful players, the church and the crown. You're not just a random victim. You're caught in a system that's been polished to a grim shine, where drowning was practically a line item in the legal budget. Picture yourself in a 12th century village, the kind with muddy streets and a church looming over everything. The trial by cold water was a go-to for settling disputes when evidence was scarce. Someone stole a pig accused of heresy. Off to the river you go. The church loved it, claiming it was God's will made visible. Priests would bless the water, turning a freezing pond into a divine courtroom. Kings weren't far behind, using these ordeals to keep order in a world where innocent until proven guilty was about as common as indoor plumbing. Here's the mainstream fact. By the 9th century, the ordeal of cold water was enshrined in legal codes across the Holy Roman Empire. Charlemagne's successors, like Louis the Pious, saw it as a way to standardize justice in their sprawling, fractious realms. It wasn't just for commoners. Nobles could face the water too, though they often got cushier treatment, like a slightly warmer lake. The system spread to England, France, and beyond, with local lords tweaking the rules to suit their whims. Now for the quirky bit: in some German towns, they'd heat the water slightly for high-status defendants, claiming it was to honor them. Imagine the absurdity: you're still getting dunked, But at least it's a lukewarm death trap. It's like offering a condemned man a comfier noose. Nobody seemed to notice the hypocrisy, or if they did, they weren't dumb enough to say it out loud. Historians still argue whether the church genuinely believed in the trial's divine accuracy or if it was just a handy tool for control. Some say it was faith-driven, a way to outsource justice to God. Others argue it was a power play, letting clergy and kings dodge blame for unpopular verdicts. Either way, you're not feeling warm and fuzzy about the system as you stand there, shivering in your soggy clothes. The scene around you is grimly festive. Villagers pack the riverbank, clutching bread crusts and shouting bets on whether you'll float. The local priest, in his fancy robes, looks like he's auditioning for a morality play, while the Lord's men keep order with spears and scowls. It's less a trial and more a public holiday minus the balloons. And here's a grim joke. They called it justice, but the only thing getting judged was your ability to hold your breath. You're starting to wonder if anyone's keeping score of the bodies. The church's grip on this was ironclad. They'd framed the trial as a sacred ritual, complete with Latin prayers and incense that smelled like regret. If you floated, they'd say Satan was propping you up. If you sank, well, God loved you just not enough to keep you breathing. The crown wasn't much better. Kings used these trials to squash dissent without getting their hands dirty. Accuse a troublemaker, dunk them, and let the river take the blame. It's like medieval outsourcing, and you're the unlucky contractor. As you're dragged away, the crowd's still buzzing. You catch snippets of their chatter. Some think you're cursed, others just want to know if there's a second show tomorrow. The water's still rippling where you went under, and you can't shake the feeling that this whole thing was less about truth and more about keeping everyone in line. The church and crown built an empire on fear, and you're just one more prop in their soggy spectacle. You're shivering, the damp chill of the river still clinging to your skin as the crowd shouts fade into a dull roar. The bridge is behind you now, but the ordeal's not over. You're being marched to a new kind of nightmare, a trial by cold water specifically for witchcraft, where the stakes are higher and the water feels colder. You're not just any accused anymore. You're a woman labeled a witch, and the dunking stool they're dragging you toward is about to make that river your judge, jury, and maybe your grave. Picture yourself in a 16th century English village, the air thick with wood smoke and paranoia. Witch hunts are raging, and the trial by cold water has found its star victim. The witch, you're tied to a wooden chair, the dunking stool, which looks like a sadistic seesaw built by someone who hates fun. The setup's simple but brutal. They lower you into the water, hold you under, then yank you up to see if you're still kicking. Float, and you're a witch, bound for the gallows. Sink, and you're innocent assuming you don't drown first. It's a twisted game show, and you're the contestant nobody's rooting for. Here's the mainstream fact. During the European witch craze, roughly 1450 to 1750, water ordeals were a go-to for identifying witches, especially in England and Scotland. Legal manuals like the 1597 Daemonology by King James VI endorsed them, claiming witches were light as a feather because Satan made them buoyant. Thousands, mostly women, faced this test, often after being accused of trivial things like a sour milk churn or a neighbor's sick cow. Now the quirky tidbit: some villages used witch pricking before the dunk. They'd jab you with needles to find a devil's mark, a spot that didn't bleed. If they found one, it was straight to the dunking stool. Imagine the absurdity. You're poked until you bruise, then dunked to prove you're not evil. It's like failing a test for having skin. Nobody questioned the logic, probably because questioning meant you might be next. Historians still argue whether these trials were driven by genuine fear of witchcraft or if they were a convenient way to settle scores and control women. Some say it was mass hysteria fueled by religious fervor. Others point to social tensions, like property disputes or gender norms. Either way, you're not feeling like a scholar as you're strapped to that stool, the wood creaking under your weight. The scene is chaos with a side of cruelty. The crowd's packed tighter than a market day, kids perched on shoulders for a better view. They're shouting witch like it's a chant they've practiced. The local magistrate, looking smug in his ruffled collar, nods to the men working the stool. Your lord. And the water hits like a slappy. Murky stealing your breath. You thrash, but the ropes hold tight. They pull you up, gasping, and the crowd leans in, eyeing you like a fish on a hook. You're sinking in their minds already, guilty before you even went under. Here's a dark joke. They called it a fair trial. But the only thing fair was how equally bad everyone's odds were. You're starting to see the pattern logic's on holiday, and fear's running the show. The dunking stool dips again, and you're under longer this time, bubbles escaping your lips as you pray for air. When they haul you up, the magistrate's already scribbling guilty in his ledger. Floating's a death sentence, but sinking's no picnic either. Plenty of innocent women didn't make it back to shore. As you're untied, coughing and half frozen, you notice the crowd's glee. This isn't just about you, it's about them, their fears, their need to point at someone and say, there's the problem. You're a scapegoat in a soggy dress. And the dunking stool's just the prop they need to keep the witch panic alive. The river's still lapping at the bank indifferent, and you're wondering how many others it swallowed for the same flimsy reasons. You're stumbling away from the dunking stool, legs wobbly, clothes heavy with river water, the taste of mud still in your mouth. The crowd's not done with you yet. Their cheers and jeers follow you like a swarm of wasps. You're not just a person anymore, you're a spectacle. And this trial by cold water has turned into a twisted village festival. The riverbank is alive with energy, and you're at the center of a mob that's less interested in justice and more in the thrill of watching someone squirm. Imagine yourself in this 16th century scene, the air buzzing with excitement. The crowd's a mix of farmers, merchants, and kids who probably snuck out of chores to be here. They've brought snacks, crusty bread, maybe some cheesy, and they're passing around ale like it's a tailgate party. The trial's not just a legal proceeding, it's the main event, drawing folks from miles away. You're tied up, shivering, while they shout insults or chant prayers, depending on their mood. Some think you're guilty, others just like the drama. Either way, you're the entertainment. Here's the mainstream fact. Public ordeals like the trial by cold water were major social events in medieval and early modern Europe, especially during the witch hunts. Records from England's assize courts in the 1600s show hundreds of spectators at witch trials, with local officials sometimes charging admission. It was like a grim precursor to reality TV, where your fate was the plot twist everyone waited for. Now the quirky tidbit. In some towns, they'd sell witch trial souvenirs, bits of rope or cloth from the accused clothing. Imagine someone haggling over a soggy scrap of your dress, calling it a lucky charm. It's absurd, like buying a piece of a haunted house. But people ate it up. These trinkets were half keepsake, half proof you were there when the river spoke. Historians still argue whether the mob's fervor was genuine belief in the trial's justice or just a release valve for pent-up fears and grudges. Some say the crowd was swept up in religious zeal, seeing witches as real threats. Others argue it was boredom and social pressure, with neighbors egging each other on to join the chaos. Either way, you're not feeling the love as you stand there, the crowd's eyes boring into you. The scene feels like a fever dream. A woman in the front row's waving a rosary like it's a rally flag, while a guy nearby spits and calls you a devil's pawn. Kids are throwing pebbles, aiming for your feet, and nobody stops them. The magistrate's men keep the crowd back, but not too far. They want the energy high. It's a circus, and you're the reluctant lion tamer. Here's a grim joke. They called it a trial by water, but the real test was surviving the audience. You're starting to wonder if the river was the kinder judge. The mob's not just here for you, they're feeding off each other. Every shout, every gasp, amps up the frenzy. You catch a glimpse of a mother scolding her son for crying. She wants him to cheer for justice, not pity you. It's chilling how quickly they've all agreed you're the villain. The trial's mechanics float or sink don't even matter anymore. The crowds decided your guilt, and the water's just a formality. You're a scapegoat for their bad harvests, their sick kids, their unspoken fears. As you're dragged toward the village square, the crowd follows, a living wave of noise and heat. You hear bets being placed how long you'll last, whether you'll confess. Some are already planning the next trial, eyeing their neighbors with suspicion. The dunking stool's still by the river, ready for its next victim, and you realize this isn't about finding truth. It's about keeping the mob happy, giving them a show to talk about over dinner. You're just the spark that lights their fire, and the river's the stage where it all burns bright. You're being hustled away from the river, the mob's clamor fading but still prickling your skin like static. Your clothes are stiff with drying mud, and every step feels heavier, as if the trial's weight is sinking into your bones. The dunking stool and cheering crowds are behind you, but you're starting to wonder why this whole water ordeal feels like it's losing its grip. The trial by cold water, once a courtroom staple, is fading, and you're about to walk through the cracks of a system crumbling under its own contradictions. Picture yourself in a 17th century European town, where the air smells of coal and change. The Enlightenment is creeping in, and people are starting to squint at old rituals with new skepticism. The trial by cold water, once backed by kings and clergy, is looking shakier than a bad alchemist's potion. Courts are shifting toward evidence, witnesses, and you think it logic. You're still in the shadow of the old ways, but you can feel the ground shifting, like a tide pulling back from shore. Here's the mainstream fact. By the late 1600s, legal reforms across Europe began phasing out ordeals like the trial by cold water. In England, the 1641 abolition of the Star Chamber Court weakened the use of arbitrary punishments, and by 1717, English common law largely rejected water trials as unreliable. On the continent, figures like the Dutch jurist Justy Danhouder pushed for rational legal codes, arguing that divine ordeals were no match for human reason. Now the quirky tidbit: in some German states, water trials lingered as late as the 1740s, but only for unofficial cases, like village disputes over stolen chickens. Imagine getting dunked because your neighbor's hen went missing. It's like a deadly small claims court. These holdouts were less about justice and more about stubborn tradition, clinging to the past like a bad haircut. Historians still argue whether the decline was driven by intellectual progress or practical failures. Some say Enlightenment thinkers like Voltaire shamed the system into obscurity with their witty critiques. Others point out that too many innocent people drowned, making the trial a public relations disaster for courts. Either way, you're relieved to be standing on dry land, even if the crowd's still muttering about witches. The scene around you is quieter now. You're in a town square where a new kind of justice is taking shape. A judge in a powdered wig scribbles in a ledger, relying on testimony rather than river gods. The dunking stool is rusting by the river, a relic nobody's eager to polish. But don't get too cozy, change is slow, and some villages still sneak in the old rituals when nobody's watching. You hear whispers of a secret dunking last week, hushed up by embarrassed officials. It's like the trial's a bad habit the law can't quite kick. Here's a dry joke. They swapped water trials for paperwork, proving bureaucracy can drown you just as fast. You're starting to see the shift, though. The mob's still out there, hungry for drama. But courts are leaning on witnesses and written records. It's not perfect false accusations. Still flip it, at least you're not being tossed into a pond to prove you didn't steal a loaf of bread. The church, once the trial's biggest fan, is losing its grip too. Priests are preaching about mercy now, not divine lie detectors. As you shuffle through the square, you notice the river in the distance, glinting innocently under the sun. It's just water now, not a judge or a jury. The trial's decline feels like a small victory, but you can't shake the stories of those who didn't make it this far, sank or floated. They were victims of a system that loved spectacle over sense. The law's moving on, but the memory of those icy plunges lingers, like a chill you can't quite shake. You're free for now, but the past is never far behind. You're standing in the town square, the river's glint a distant memory now, its judgmental ripples fading into the past. The dunking stool is gone, replaced by dusty law books and the drone of courtroom arguments. But the trial by cold water hasn't vanished completely, it's left a shadow, a ghost that haunts the way we think about justice today. You're walking through a modern world, yet you can't help but feel the echo of those icy plunges in the systems and stories we still tell. Picture yourself in a present-day courtroom, all polished wood and humming air conditioning. The idea of tossing someone into a river to prove innocence sounds like a fever dream. But the trial's legacy lingers in subtle, unsettling ways. Our justice system loves its ritual oaths, gavels, black robes, and you're wondering if they're all that different from a priest blessing a pond. The water trial's DNA is in our obsession with tests of truth, from lie detectors to trial by media. You're not tied to a dunking stool, but you can feel the weight of judgment all the same. Here's the mainstream fact. The trial by cold water influenced early modern legal principles, particularly the idea of trial by ordeal as a precursor to adversarial justice. Legal historians note that the shift away from ordeals in the 18th century helped birth the modern jury system, where human deliberation replaced divine whims. The river's verdict gave way to 12 people in a box, but the stakes, guilt or innocence, haven't changed. Now the quirky tidbit. The phrase sink or swim might trace back to water trials, a linguistic fossil of those brutal tests. Imagine casually telling a friend to sink or swim at a new job, not realizing you're echoing a medieval death sentence. It's a weird little reminder that history hides in plain sight, like a riverbed under calm water. Historians still argue whether the trial's legacy is more about fear or fairness. Some say it taught us to distrust arbitrary judgments, paving the way for evidence-based law. Others argue it left a darker mark, fueling our love for public shaming. Think online pylons or reality TV tribunals. Either way, you're glad you're not bobbing in a river as strangers bet on your fate. The scene shifts to a modern day, maybe your own. You're scrolling through your phone, and there it is. A viral video of someone being canceled for a bad tweet. The comments are a digital mob, demanding justice with the same glee you saw on that 16th century riverbag. It's not water, but it's a trial all the same, guilt assumed, evidence optional. Here's a quiet joke. We don't dunk witches anymore, but we sure love watching people sink. The trial by cold water feels ancient, yet its spirit lives in how we judge, quick and ruthless. Before the facts settle, you pause, thinking of those accused witches, their faces blurred by time. The trial was never about truth. It was about control, about pointing at someone and saying, they're the problem. Today's version might be less deadly, but it's no less human. We've traded rivers for algorithms, priests for pundits, but the urge to test, to judge, to spectaculize runs deep. You're starting to see the trial not as a relic, but as a mirror, reflecting our flaws back at us. As you close your phone, the world feels a little heavier. The river's gone, but its lessons aren't. Justice should be fair, not a show. You're safe, standing on dry ground, but the past whispers. Don't forget the ones who sank. Their stories, their cold, silent endings, remind you to question the tests we still put each other through. You're back in your room now, the glow of your screen dimming as the night settles in. The story of the trial by cold water fades like a dream, its icy grip loosening with every slow breath you take. Let the river's churn slip away, let the crowd's shouts dissolve into silence. You're here, warm, safe, wrapped in the quiet of your own space. History's lessons linger, but they don't have to keep you awake. Imagine a soft breeze, carrying away the weight of those old injustices, leaving only calm behind. The world's still spinning, but for now it's just you, this moment, and the gentle hum of a fan in the dark. Close your eyes, let the past rest, and drift into a softer place. Good night, friend, until the next story calls.